and something else Deming said, and it goes to this notion of accountability. He says, if the system is not working, you don't blame the people at the bottom doing the work. You blame the people who created the system.
There you go.
And the only way to fix it is by fixing the folks at the top, because they're the ones who make the decision. You have no decision-making power over the resource allocation. That's not your choice. You're doing, he said, the system works well when you hire the right people, when you support them, when you make sure that they have the opportunity to have joy in their work, because everybody seeks to have joy in their work. But when you make the system punitive and harsh, they will not have joy in their work, and the whole system will not work. So the day we should all work for is the day when you are allowed to teach and have joy in your work.
That's right.
So I want to mention a couple of things. One is that in my introduction, Jean didn't mention the things that I've been doing most recently that I'm very excited about. First is I have a book coming out in the fall, and I believe, that, if I remember correctly, that the General Administration will be one of the stars of my book. The book is called Reign of Error. The subtitle is The Hoax of Privatization and Its Dangers to America's Public Schools. It's going to be published in September, I think, by Knopf. And Alfred A. Knopf, if you don't know this, is the best publisher, the gold standard publisher in the United States. It's not a small academic press. It is owned by Random House. It is a major AAA publisher. So just remember the Reign of Error, because you may see some familiar faces there. But the other thing that I've been doing that I'm excited about is that a couple of years ago, I started tweeting. I'm now up to close to 47,000 followers. And I'm almost neck and neck with Michelle Rhee, although I think she buys her followers. Just as she buys her members. If you've ever gone into change.org to sign a petition, be very, very careful, because you may sign a petition saying, I'm in favor of puppies and dogs and little children, and then they'll say to you, do you support great teachers? And you say, yes, I support great teachers, and whether you know it or not, you just joined Students First.
Yeah.
I happen to be a member of Students First. And the way I found out about this was that I started a blog, and I blogged about the fact that people were being tricked and duped into joining Students First in this way. And so I got an email from somebody at change.org saying, well, we want you to know that this is such and such is our policy. I forget what he said their policy was. It was about, we need more money and she brings in money or something like that. The usual. And so we exchanged emails, and then he said, by the way, you are a member of Students First. You signed one of the petitions. And I said, well, oh my God, that's awful. And I thought, if I go to the website to try to figure out how to get off their list, they will count me again as a member. And I do not want to be two members of Students First, so I'm just going to retain my membership. But when you hear that she has 2 million members, please realize that probably 90% of them are phantom members. And she has these numbers only because she wants to impress politicians and go in and say, look at all my members. In your state, I have 17,000, as she said, in Mississippi and Alabama, where I doubt that she even has 12. But it gives her a certain political clout to say that. So the tweeting is one thing, but a year ago, not quite a year ago, at the end of April, I was being covered by a writer for the New Yorker, and he was writing a profile, and we were driving in from someplace in New Jersey where I had been to speak, and he said, well, I've been interviewing your critics, and they say that you're a defender of the status quo. And I said, yeah, right, that's what they always say. If you happen to prefer public education over charters or vouchers, you're a defender of the status quo. And so he said, well, they say that you have all these criticisms, but you aren't offering any positive solutions. And I said, well, you just heard me speak. You heard all the positive solutions I have to offer about early childhood education, about all these things that should be done. And he said, well, you should write a book. I said, okay, I'll write a book. So that's the book that became Reign of Error. I wrote it last summer. But more importantly, after I spoke with him, I decided to start my own blog. And so the blog is at dianeravitch.net. It started April 24th. And since April 24th, I have had 3.2 million page views.
Right.
Now that is... I was about to say I'm not saying that to boast, but then I thought, I'm saying that to boast. Because I think it's so exciting, because what happens is, every time I post a blog, and if you go on my blog, you've got to be really, really interested in the issues. You're going to be overwhelmed, because I'll post anywhere from 10 to 20 times a day. So much so that I periodically get an email saying, how do I get off your blog? I'm going crazy. But if you want to know what's happening in California, in New Mexico, where Jeb Bush's deputy is the acting commissioner, in Florida, where half of the failing schools in the state are charter schools. I report, people send me news stories from everywhere, and I send them out. I also many times people will write letters that are so moving that I will reprint them as posts, and I'll say I got this from a reader. And I always maintain people's anonymity, because I know these days that teachers feel so afraid that if you dare to say anything that makes you unhappy, you're afraid you might be fired, which is a reasonable fear. But that's been a tremendous, for me, I spend hours every day on this blog. I wake up in the morning blogging, and I go to sleep at night blogging. So there you go. Take a look at it. But as I said, you've got these fabulous bloggers in Louisiana. They kept me informed that, first of all, the exciting news that the voucher bill was thrown out because of funding. There's this awkward thing in Louisiana. It's called the state constitution. And it keeps getting in the way of all these wonderful reform ideas. So one of them is that they want to take money out of your public school budget and give it to kids to go to little religious schools where they teach that dinosaurs and men walk the earth at the same time, or that the Loch Ness Monster is real, or that slavery was really good for people who were enslaved. Weird things like that, but the Constitution says that the money is dedicated for the maintenance of public elementary and secondary schools, and it's really hard to square religious schools with public elementary and secondary schools. So the governor, in his wisdom, has decided to ignore the court decision, because he's sure it'll be overturned, so he's simply ignoring it, which is really a wonderful example of civics.
Yes, it is.
If you don't like a judge's ruling, you just simply ignore it and hope someday it'll be overturned. And then, of course, I learned about the decision of a judge recently to throw out all of Act 1. Wherein the governor was acting in the tradition of Michelle Rhee, which is you show your appreciation for teachers by firing them. So that was great news. The bad thing is that it was thrown out strictly on procedural grounds, and they'll be back with more. But then there's still good news. The governor's popularity rating is down to 37%. So it's up to you. It's up to you and everybody who cares about the future of the state and the future of the children in the state and democracy in the state to keep driving those numbers down lower and lower to the point where the legislature worries about following his lead. So I also wanted to mention Mercedes Schneider, talking about bloggers. Mercedes is a phenomenon. I didn't meet her until today. I don't know if any of you have seen her blog. Look up Mercedes Schneider. She's, I think, teaching in St. Tammany's Parish. And she just does incredible stuff. I mean, she decided she would review the members of the board of something called the National Council for Teacher Quality. And she went through them one by one, showing their background and how little experience any of them had in teaching. There were people like, they'll be familiar names, Michelle Rhee, Wendy Comp, who's never taught at TFA, Joel Klein, Chancellor of New York City Schools, who I think taught for a month. He may have been fired, I'm not sure. And then lots of other people who are on this board who set themselves up as the evaluators of teacher quality. and they never talk. So one by one, she's gone through them, and she's written a number of blogs about what's happening in Louisiana. And when I see her blogs, I email with her and I say, aren't you afraid of losing your job? I mean, I know that any minute she's going to write a blog about what an idiot John White is. And she says, well, she already has. So I say, aren't you afraid of losing your job? And she says, well, as long as my scores are up, I'll be fine. So I think she's either incredibly brave or totally insane. And I decided, this is Louisiana. Probably she's both.
That's right.
So today I'll tell you just a little bit about my discussion with Chaz Romer. And I started it by asking the question, people who call themselves reformers. I don't call them reformers, I call them corporate reformers. The corporate reformers like to talk about the international comparisons, and they say, why can't we be like Finland? Why can't we be like Japan or Korea or Singapore? So I said, well, what do these countries do? First of all, they have a strong public education system. Every one of them. They do not have vouchers. They do not have charters. They've not privatized any part of their school system. Secondly, they have a strong education profession. They have highly trained professional teachers and principals and superintendents. They don't bring in admirals and generals to run their school system. And third, teachers are highly respected in all these societies. And they value experience. There is no such thing as teach for Finland or teach for Japan. In Finland, they do not permit amateurs to teach, period.
Exactly right.
Student teachers are under close supervision. They are not given their own class.
Yep. Yes.
And next, they have all of these societies that we look upon enviously have a full curriculum for all children. They have the arts, they have sciences, history, civics, and geography, and physical education and foreign languages. They have a library and librarians. They have guidance counselors. And so, knowing what I know about Louisiana, I said to Chaz Romer, Louisiana is not following the best practices of the nations that are high performing.
Oh, bless it.
So I'll give you, again, some of what I think were some of the really good lines. I said, instead of following the best practices, Louisiana is engaging in a massive privatization scheme,
Yes.
which is designed to hand off the children and taxpayers' dollars to religious schools, entrepreneurs, chain schools, and for-profit corporations. And this state is dismantling one of the institutions that is absolutely essential to a democratic society. This is a risky scheme. It has no evidence behind it. It's not even conservative. Conservatives don't go around tearing down traditional institutions. Conservatives are conservatives. They don't tear apart their local community's public school system. This is a radical scheme. It's a reactionary scheme, and it's reckless with children's lives and taxpayer dollars. And so I explained, because I've seen someone sent me the material that he's posted on Facebook about how vouchers have succeeded here, there, and everywhere. And I said, look at Milwaukee. Milwaukee is the best example of what vouchers do. Milwaukee's had vouchers for 22 years. It now has a thriving voucher sector, 20,000 children, a thriving charter sector, 20,000 children, and about 80,000 children left still in what used to be a thriving public school system. All three sectors, whether it's voucher, charter, or public schools, get the same results. When the state scores came out, there was no difference amongst them, although the public school system was overloaded with children with disabilities because the charter schools and the voucher schools don't want them.
That's exactly right.
And the charter schools and the voucher schools don't take any children with severe disabilities. So the public school has extraordinary proportions of these kids. Now, despite all of the competition and all of the choice, and the fact that these three sectors don't have, there's no distinction between them, one doesn't do better than the other, When you look at where Milwaukee stands on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is based on a scientific sample, Milwaukee is one of the lowest performing districts in the United States. It ranks slightly above Detroit. It's a very low performing district. And the people who put all of these so-called reforms in place, all these privatization schemes, said, we're leading the civil rights movement. We're doing it for black children. They're civil rights leaders, right? Well, where do you think black children in Milwaukee rank? They rank with black children in Mississippi and Louisiana and the Deep South, because they have made no progress as a result of dividing the public system into 3 different sectors, triplicating functions, and spending money on schools that were no better than the public schools. They could have taken that same amount of money, the billions that have been spent, and put that into the needs of children. One, I think that, there are some good charter schools, there's some terrible charter schools. There are 2 concepts that charter schools have brought us that are absolutely, I think, brand new and terrible in American education. One is the concept of a chain school. I mean, think about it. We always had neighborhood public schools. Some were better than others, but they were your neighborhood community school. We worked to make it better. We now have chain schools like Walmart, chain schools like Target, like Starbucks. These schools they may come from Arizona, they may come from Texas, they may come from Florida. They're not your community schools. They're run by some corporation that's very far from your community. And if they don't like the results they're getting, they'll pull out and leave you and dump those kids, and they've done it time and again. When a kid has bad results, what do you think they do? They close the school and they leave. The only time the KIPP ever took over an existing school was in Denver. The school was called Cole Elementary School. And they tried a couple of years, the scores remained low, and they simply closed it down and left. Did the same thing in one of the upstate New York communities. But we have chain schools. These take the place of community schools. People who are pushing choice don't understand community. They don't care that they're going to tear a community apart by having people fighting over who goes to which school and who gets into which place, and fighting over space and fighting over resources, instead of everybody pulling the oar together in the same direction.
That's right.
The second concept that the charters have given us, which is really pernicious, is the idea that public schools can be operated for profit. It's incredible. Florida has dozens and dozens of for-profit charter chains. In the state of Michigan, where there are many charter schools, more than 80% of them operate for profit. That's money taken out of taxpayers' pockets and given over to investors instead of put into the classroom for art and for music and for the things that children love doing. So the worst of the charters are the virtual charters, and I know that, do you have your virtual academy yet?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been studying them. I have a chapter on them, and here's what they do. They come into a state and they find the poorest district in the state, and they say, we'll give you a piece of the profits if you will allow us to headquarter in your district. So that district, that poor district, says, wow, this is a windfall of $2 million, $3 million, $4 million for our district. Meanwhile, the virtual charter sets up, and the next thing you know, they have thousands of kids signing up because they're constantly trolling for new students. They're constantly recruiting, and because I've done so much research on K-12, every time I open up my computer, I get an ad for K-12. But K-12 connections, there are a bunch of them now, they get terrible academic results. First of all, the dropout rate is very high. The motivation level of the children is very hard to sustain. I mean, think of it, sitting in front of a computer and getting your education with no social interaction with other children, with no social interaction with the teacher. And your parent is your learning coach. Well, this is basically homeschooling with a computer, where the company gets full state tuition. It's a ripoff. And Pennsylvania is now overwhelmed with virtual schools. They now have 16 of them. 16 virtual schools all competing, and they have, I forget how many thousands of students, but they're all making a lot of money. They get terrible results. None of them have made AYP. None of them have been closed down. The profits are enormous. The biggest of the virtual chains is K-12. K-12 was started by Michael Milken, the junk bond king, and his brother. And they brought in Bill Bennett as their spokesman. Bill Bennett would appeal to the homeschooling parents. And now they have about 150,000 kids, but 50% of them will drop out every year, so they have to keep recruiting. And when the kids drop out, the money stays with the company, and the child goes back to public school with no money.
There you go.
And it's the CEO of K-12 makes $5 million a year. So, as I like to say, sort of like your average superintendent. But here's the deal with the charters, and that is that they try to operate on a business model. Now, what that means, the business model, and Chaz totally doesn't understand this idea. The business model means you do risk management. When people are paid in business to do risk management, what that means is you get rid of your losers and you keep your winners. So you close down the schools that aren't working and you open new ones, hoping that they might work. But you do the same thing with students. You keep the winners and you kick out the losers. Or you have, and we have a very aggressive charter chain in New York City, where they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars marketing the charter before it opens. So there are flyers everywhere, there are posters, you see pictures of children neatly dressed in their little uniforms. The school hasn't even opened yet and already wearing their uniforms. But they're everywhere. They're on bus stops, bus stop shelters. It's in your mailbox telling you, you enroll in this charter, your child's going right to Harvard. And it's all marketing. What it's about is to be able to turn out a huge number of people in the lottery so that they can have this sense of anticipation. Oh my God, I've got to get my child into this charter. And so they'll have 5,000 people turn out for a lottery where there are only 80 seats. And then people are so disappointed. That's why they want the crowd, is they want to be able to go to politicians and say, we need more charters. Look at the demand, look at the waiting list. And this is part of how they market the brand. So, what's happened in New York is the public schools try to compete. So whereas the charter school, this chain, is spending $300,000 a year, $400,000 a year on marketing, the public school that they're competing with is a budget of $500. How can you compete? This is not competition.